Self-love is honoring your core values, your core intentions, giving yourself permission to follow through, and giving yourself boundaries so that you don't sway from that. Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day. Today is going to be a great day of self-discovery, of understanding the real value of self-love on this Valentine's Day special. On this day that we celebrate love, we're focusing on self-love. Why that's so important. Why self-love is the only way to receive love from others and to be able to give true love away. Isn't that interesting? You know, I think so many of us fear that we don't have enough love in our lives, or maybe there's a love that's not reciprocated, or maybe we don't even know what love is. And it all starts with love for yourself. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. I want to share with you this quote from Lao Tzu. Because one believes in oneself, one doesn't have to convince others. Because one is content with oneself, one doesn't need others' approval. Because one accepts oneself, the whole world accepts him or her. And I think that speaks volumes. And we can very easily remind ourselves that the same is true of love. Because one loves oneself, one can be open to the love of others and be able to give so much love. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how self-love is actually the key ingredient to so many things. It's actually the key ingredient to leadership. Positive, empowered, impactful leadership absolutely requires self-love. It's the key to receiving love and being in a passionate, intimate relationship with another human being. Absolutely critical to that. I mean, can you imagine for a moment, no matter how much you ask someone else to love you, if you don't love yourself, how could they possibly do that? Imagine for a moment I baked you a cake and I said, you know, this really doesn't taste very good. I'm most certainly not going to eat it, but I want you to. And when you do, I want you to love it. I mean, how unreasonable is that? And the same is true for self-love. I even argue to be a good parent, you have to have self-love. Absolutely. Because there are so many things, my friend, let me tell you, in my short 15 years, almost 16, my gosh, 16 years of parenting here, of all genders, of all ages, of all capacities, all intelligences, all capabilities, and miraculous skill levels, parenting requires me to dig into loving myself 100% in order to be a good parent. In fact, it's the moments when I liked myself least that I scared myself as a parent, that I was most disappointing in my parenting decisions. That self-love component comes back over and over again. Friendships and relationships and connecting with others, being able to experience happiness and joy. You know, on the business of happiness, I hear this all the time. What is happiness? We ask all of our guests, what is your definition of happiness? And so many of my listeners write in and ask me, really, I hear everything you're saying, but how do I feel happiness? My clients who I work with who are so accomplished and have achieved so much and can do anything they put their minds to, say to me, the one thing that I can't feel is happiness. And at the core of all of that is self-acceptance and self-love. So that is what we're talking about today. I'm so excited to be sharing this with you. I cannot wait. I think this is the key aspect of Valentine's Day, that so much has been missing in recent years. We forget to focus on ourselves. We don't give ourselves permission to focus on ourselves when it comes to love. We give it away so freely and beautifully. And what an incredible attribute if that is someone you are who just so comfortably loves others. But we have to remember to turn it back on ourselves on a regular, if not a daily basis. I even argue on an hourly basis, because it's when we stand in an appreciation of who we are that we can give that away. I recently was reflecting on self-love and my own journey with self-love. And I think I've shared this before on this podcast, but this was really hard for me a few years ago. And believe me, it's still a practice. One of those things, it's not a destination, it's a practice that for me has been difficult. And maybe you have so easily felt self-love. Maybe you're one of those people who just has so much self-worth naturally, and I honor you if you do. I am so envious of that superpower, people who just feel the worthiness and the deservancy of themselves from every moment. I have one of my children feels that, and it's a beautiful thing to see. It's been something I've struggled with my whole life. I have great self-belief. I know I can create any business I want to create. I can make anything happen that I want to happen. The challenge I've personally had is that self-worth. So for me, self-love, when I first started even imagining it, was enormously intimidating. And I thought, I don't even know how to start. I love to run. It's one of my passions. Running was one of my first meditative practices. And I didn't even know that's what I was doing. I just knew I loved running, and I didn't know why. Turns out I love being in nature. Turns out doing something repetitive and allowing yourself to breathe deeply and having the monotony of your steps and the focus of your steps and taking your mind off of everything else and giving yourself some freedom and throw in some endorphins there. And that's what meditation is. Turns out I was meditating. I didn't even know it. That's why I loved it so much. It's where I was getting my downloads for new ideas and creativity. It's also where I was loving myself. Well, what happened with running is I also have a very competitive edge. So I started competing against myself and creating urgency around it. I started pushing myself. Because I was loving it, I was doing really well. It was a newfound resource for me in so many ways. And so I started challenging myself, trying to run faster, get longer distances, have better times. I kept finding new PRs and it felt great. So I kept pushing myself further. And what I did to push myself further was something that I'd been practicing for decades, which was self-threatening behavior, self-punishment. So when I'd get to a place where I was exhausted, 12 miles in, and I thought, today you're supposed to run 14, I'd punish myself, force myself, start berating myself, start threatening myself. I'd start imagining all the people who didn't have as much as I have and start threatening myself that I better appreciate what I have. Instead of using it as an opportunity for self-love, I started pushing myself. In fact, I think I've shared on this podcast before, if you're a runner, you'll know you have power songs. And what a power song is, if you listen to music while you're running, you have a playlist. I love music. Music is a big part of my life. So I had playlists for 5Ks and 10Ks and 10 miles and 12 miles. I had playlists that I'd planned out very carefully because I knew when I'd have my dips in energy and when I'd need a little boost. And that's what a power song is. A power song is one of those songs that has great meaning to you, maybe has a great beat that fits with your cadence, and you put it on, and when you hear it, it gives you a little bump of energy when you need it most. Sometimes right at the finish line, sometimes in the low. In fact, on a lot of really cool apps for running, they even have a button you can press that when you unexpectedly need your power song, hit me with it. Right? You just realize you have a low or you have a hill or something that you need to face. And so you pull out your power song. Well, my power song was Bad Romance by Lady Gaga. Now, please, no judgment here from anybody who's listening. There is a point to my story. And please don't judge my song selection because it's changed. It's morphed through the years. Anyway, Bad Romance by Lady Gaga. The way I interpreted it for myself was the bad romance I had with my body and with myself. So bad romance is kind of a threatening love. It's a bad romance. It's a story of a terrible romance. It's an obsession in this romance, but it's also an anger, a resentment, a hatred. It's kind of this terrible give and take, but it's not from a place of enormous compassion or self-love or even love for the other person in the romance, in the song. But this was my power song to me. I tell you this story only to share with you how far from self-love I was coming. Just to share with you that this has not been easy for me either. I know what it feels like not to love myself. I know what it feels like to threaten and punish and abuse myself to the point of achievement. Does that resonate with anybody listening? Threaten, abuse, push myself until I achieved. That was the name of the game for me for so many years. If I didn't feel a little bad about something, if I didn't feel a little uncomfortable with something, if I didn't feel a little guilty about something, then I'd make myself feel that way so that I pushed myself harder. How dare I even settle right now when I know that there's someone who has less? How dare I even consider taking a break in this long run or in this pursuit of my dreams or in this achievement that I'm chasing? There was no self-love. And let me tell you, there's a modicum of success that comes from it. You push yourself, you force yourself, you show up every day. My friend, you will find success. No doubt. The numbers will stack on each other. But you will tear yourself down in the meantime. And the same is true for seeking love and affection outside of yourself. There has to be a part of you that has an enormous self-compassion and love for yourself, and it has to be a practice. It doesn't just turn on. It's not something that you can wake up one day and say, I love myself. Today I decide to love myself. Trust me, if you've been doing it for decades the other way, it is so difficult to turn that ship around, but it is possible. It is possible. And some of you might be saying, I don't even know what love is if I think about it. I'm not even sure what that self-love would even look like. I can't even remember if I ever had that for myself. And really, Tarryn, what's the difference between egoic self-love, self-obsession, putting yourself up on a pedestal and thinking you're so much better than everyone else, and the true love of self with higher awareness of your higher self? What is the difference between those two? The closest thing I can say is that we all know what love feels like. No, Tarryn, I don't know what love feels like. You don't know what I know. Let me give you some examples. If you are a parent or an aunt or an uncle or an adopted aunt or uncle, and you've held a tiny baby, and you've had that enormous sense of awe. Maybe tears came to your eyes. A feeling of just this enormous, expansive love. Unconditional love in that moment. Now, don't rush and change in your mind's eye. Don't think back to that tiny child that you had who's now grown up to be a different human. Let's just talk about that moment. Let's imagine love as a wave that washed over you, even if it didn't stay with you. That is love. That is that expansive awareness and love. Or take yourself to that top of that mountain that you climbed, or that beautiful vacation where you just felt so good. And maybe you said to yourself, man, Corsica was gorgeous. I have got to go back there. Or you've told a friend, man, I loved Thailand so much. It is spectacular. Go to that place. That awe on top of that mountain, that beauty in front of that waterfall, that moment when that deer looked you in the eye. That was love. That was a wave of love. Those moments can happen for you too. Moments of love for you. Maybe there was a moment when you felt it and you had this kind of wave of love for yourself and you immediately put up a wall because self-love feels selfish. Self-love feels egoic. No, there's a difference. There's a difference between a self-congratulatory, self-egoic love that's based on your body or your accomplishments. And there's the self-love, which is pure acceptance. That is self-love, pure acceptance. When you were holding that baby, when you looked into that deer's eye when you were hiking and you didn't expect to see the deer cross your path and she looked straight at you, when you were on that mountaintop and you saw the gorgeous perfection of nature around you, or you were on that vacation and you just felt this wave of pure ecstasy. That is acceptance. There's no judgment in that moment of the baby in your arms. There's no judgment in that moment of the waterfall, spectacular wonder of nature in front of you. There's no judgment in that moment of freedom that you allowed yourself on your vacation when you were putting all the other external stimuli out of your mind and giving yourself peace and a moment to reflect and be aware and present in that moment. It's acceptance. Self-acceptance is self-love. And it's so interesting because when we talk about self-acceptance, it means honoring the weaknesses and the strengths and loving them both. And just because you honor a weakness and you accept it, doesn't mean you can't grow from it. This is one of the key aspects in leadership and in business. Humble humility, humble reflection on where are my weaknesses? Can I love myself for them? And then can I learn to grow? If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. You know, I know that I have many weaknesses. One of my weaknesses is I am not a good gift giver. I'm very bad at picking out gifts. I know that many of my team members at my orthodontic practice and on my Business of Happiness team, their greatest love language is gift giving. Gifts matter to some people. To me, they just don't. I don't have that. That's not one of my strengths. I'm not able to pick out a great gift for someone. But I can have compassion for myself around it instead of judging it. And then the great thing as a team leader is I can hire and acknowledge someone on my team who has that strength. And I put them in a position where they can actually serve better. They can make this business a better business. We can do better because I can capitalize on that awesome strength. So by just accepting that weakness of mine, I can find strengths in others to support me. Same in my family. When I have to buy gifts for someone, I go to my sister-in-law. She's amazing at it. She is so good at picking out gifts. And I say, Jessica, here's what I need. I need a gift for someone. What do you suggest? And even if it's just a conversation that stimulates some ideas for me, I am so grateful to her. So it's acceptance. But it doesn't mean I can't grow from it. It doesn't mean I can't find a weakness and work on it and learn from it, learn from the best, learn from the people I admire, and maybe cultivate that characteristic in myself. It doesn't mean I just lay back and say, oh, well, I'm terrible at this. I'll never get any better. The same is true with self-love. It is a practice, and even if you're not good at it, you can get better at it. And I have some great suggestions. We've touched on a few of them just in this conversation already, but let's outline them into 5 aspects of self-love. Because I wish someone had helped me with this years ago when I was struggling, when I recognized, my gosh, Tarryn, everything is falling apart in your life. Your business is falling apart. Your marriage is falling apart. Your friendships are falling apart. Your body is falling apart. You are never happy. When I had that moment, I wish that someone could have just given me a few steps to take. Just the beginning, even if it wasn't the whole answer, because I couldn't have seen the whole answer. I couldn't have wrapped my arms around it. I needed baby steps. When I realized, my gosh, Tarryn, you have been singing bad romance to yourself in every aspect of your life. You've been threatening yourself with your bad parenting. You've been threatening yourself with your bad marriage. You have been singing bad romance to yourself in every aspect. It is time to turn that ship around. I wish that someone had given me just a little step to take, because I can follow directions. That is one of my strengths. Give me a task, tell me it'll work, I will follow that path. So here, my friends, are 5 suggestions from me, having experienced this, having studied this from the greats, because that's what I did. I went to the greats. I went to Deepak Chopra. I went to Lao Tzu. I went to Buddha. I went to all the places that I knew self-love, unconditional love lived. And I thought, teach me how to do this. And so I'm bringing to you today 5 steps of self-love on this Valentine's Day special to give you the opportunity to walk that towards self-love, to experience a better, loving, intimate relationship. Because when I started loving myself, everything turned around with my husband. Everything. Everything. We have such a beautiful relationship now, and I promise you it was so hard to imagine that 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I couldn't even see how we could ever crawl out of the despair we were in. And I have to say that the one key part, and of course it's complicated and complex, and there's so many other aspects of developing, and it needed 2 people, obviously, 2 invested people to be a part of this journey together, because we had developed some really bad habits. But to this day, if I were to say what was the one aspect that turned your marriage around, it would be self-love for myself. I hated myself so much at the time. How could I possibly have expected him to love me? How could I possibly have any value for the love I had to give him? What had happened was our relationship had just turned into a dependency. And that's for another episode. But I do want to return on Valentine's Day to this idea of self-love and how it really is the pinnacle of all the strengths of all aspects of our lives. It comes down to self-love. And, even if this episode can be permission for you for self-love, I think that's another thing that I was missing at the time, is just the permission to love myself. No one had ever said, Tarryn, loving yourself is the most important part. It's an honorable pursuit. It's not a selfish pursuit. It's an honorable pursuit. Because when you love yourself, you can give so much more. Because when you love yourself, you take better care of yourself. And then everything falls into line. And are there days where I still beat myself up? Oh, yes, all the time. But now I have great awareness around it. I recognize those weaknesses and I can work on them and I can see growth over time. Okay, so here are those 5 steps that I've put together, that I've cultivated for you. The first one really is to foster mindfulness. And what is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is awareness. It's simple awareness. So being aware when you're singing that bad romance song to yourself, just being the observer of your thoughts. And then, even more importantly, catching those moments of unconditional, expansive, oceanic love, even when it's not for yourself, when it's for a sunrise or a puppy. Feeling those moments, observing them and being aware of it, and then recognizing, oh, wait a minute. I feel that incredible feeling of just incredible awe, bringing tears to my eyes. I am capable of it. That is the first magical aspect of self-love, mindfulness. And mindfulness, let's rather call it awareness, being the observer of your own thoughts and feelings. And how does it feel? When I have that emotion, how does it feel? When I have that thought about someone else or about myself, how does it feel? When I'm running that mile and I'm forcing myself and I'm pushing myself, how does it make me feel about myself? Just that awareness for me was everything. And then number 2, practice self-nourishment. I much prefer this term, self-nourishment. I'm going to coin that term as the new goal for 2022, self-nourishment, because I hate the concept of self-care because it's taken on a whole different impression in people's eyes based on materialism and sales. But self-nourishment feels like I'm feeding my soul. So feeding myself kindness, feeding myself compassion, feeding myself food, because for many years I didn't. For many years I was very proud of my intermittent fasting. And I wasn't doing intermittent fasting for the honorable reasons. I was doing it to punish myself or to lose weight. And I was denying myself of nutrition. So feeding yourself when you need to be fed, feeding yourself love, feeding yourself compassion. And the third one flows from this, which is forgiveness, self-forgiveness. You know, forgiveness is another one of those tricky topics, self-forgiveness, that people tend to get uncomfortable with because they think that it means you need to be reckless. So do whatever you want, forgive yourself. No, there's always the importance of accountability and responsibility, but recognizing that you will make mistakes. In fact, you're not growing if you're not making mistakes. If you're not willing to make mistakes, I'm arguing that you are sitting in a comfort zone that is not allowing you growth. So imagine self-love in the same vein. Will you make mistakes and not love yourself from time to time? Absolutely. Let it go. Let it go. Practice self-forgiveness. I just told you I'm a terrible gift giver. Do I beat myself up about it? No, I let it go. I forgive myself that. I used to think that that meant that I didn't understand or know someone when I gave someone a gift that didn't quite go over very well. I used to feel terrible about it. Well, I wasn't compassionate enough with her. I didn't know her well enough. Look, she's loving all the gifts from all my other friends, and mine kind of went over, wasn't really that beautifully accepted. I used to think that that was something wrong with me and punish myself for it, instead of forgiving myself for it and recognizing all the ways I do express love so beautifully, all the ways that I do have strengths that others don't. And then knowing that I can learn from others. Forgiveness gives freedom for learning from mistakes, but only when you forgive yourself. And then number 4 is setting boundaries. Self-love requires setting boundaries with others and with situations. One of the biggest boundary setting that I did for myself, and please, this does not have to apply to you. This just is what I needed to set for myself, was I had to stop drinking. I mean, that's a clear boundary that for me needed to happen in order to love myself. I needed to stop behaving in ways that I hated about myself. And that happened every time I drank alcohol. So for me, that was a boundary I set. Other people have no problem with that. For me, that was a boundary. Other boundaries are with people. I had to become very clear that there were some people who had negative impact in my life that made me feel bad about myself. When I allowed myself that first step of awareness, I realized, wow, every time I hang out with her, I feel really bad about myself. And that boundary had to give me some distance from that friend. Sometimes boundaries are not so much physical rules or laws or distancing. Sometimes they're just boundaries around your heart. I am not going to let that comment get to me anymore. I had to create that boundary with certain patience, that when I realized, oh, this is about them and not about me, I can't let this eat me up all night. I can't let this affect my self-love. I've asked myself, is this a real concern of something that can change in my business? And the answer was no. This is for the better good of all my patients, all my team, and myself. Then I need to put a boundary up every time this patient talks about this, because it's not something that's making me a good leader and allowing me to give my best care to my patients. So boundary setting at work and as a leader and in healthcare is critical for everybody's betterment, not just mine. And then the fifth one is to live intentionally. And I think that's where setting boundaries feels more comfortable. When we've established clearly what our intentions are, I can be so good with boundary setting at work when I know what my intentions were from the beginning, when I trust and value the intentions that I'd set. I just return to them. When those boundaries feel uncomfortable, then my intention setting saves me and allows me to feel that. Once again, that's what self-love is. Self-love is honoring your core values, your core intentions, giving yourself permission to follow through, and giving yourself boundaries so that you don't sway from that. You know, one term that I heard this weekend that I think is so beautiful in terms of boundary setting and in terms of honoring your values is having the ballast of a ship. And what a ballast is it's the bottom of the ship, right? It's that part of the ship that keeps it upright. So you sway in the storm a little bit, and maybe you'll get a little negativity and a little pushback, and you'll feel a little less self-love and self-compassion, and that ballast brings you right back again. And it's okay to rock in a storm, because when a ship is held stable, it's not going anywhere. It can't bob with the waves. It can't go anywhere. You can hold a ship in port. That's its safest place. Nothing will ever happen to it, but you'll never explore. You'll never experience the world if you keep yourself docked in the marina and never leave. Yes, you'll never be shaken. Your ballast will never be challenged, but you'll never experience the wholeness of life either. That's so important, to allow yourself to go out into the world, to feel a little bit of the pushback, and to trust and to have faith in the ballast that is yourself. And the only way that we can do that is by practicing self-love. Imagine if Valentine's Day had a greater impetus for feeling self-love. Imagine if we focused on loving yourself on Valentine's Day, practicing self-love, instead of looking for the love outside of yourself. Because when you can do that, love finds you, my friend. When you love yourself so much and value yourself so much and have compassion for yourself so much that you give yourself permission to have boundaries, that you give yourself permission to follow your dreams because your intentions are honorable and true to that self that you love, that's when happiness flows. That's when you open yourself up to attracting more love. And when the love that you have to give is valued so much more because you have set the value for it. Sending you all so much love. I have to say that just by listening through this episode, I honor you because it is evidence that you already have recognition of that self-love. It is evidence that you already have a glimpse of what that feels like. Maybe it's much more than a glimpse. Maybe you know what that self-love feels like and you're sitting there thinking, yes, Tarryn, this is how I feel. When I love myself more, I'm a better mom. When I love myself more, I'm a better leader. When I love myself more, I feel happiness more of the time. And that wave you were talking about becomes a wave that flows to me more and more frequently. Sending you so much love on Valentine's Day. And remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good.